Okay, since I was 12 years old, I would say, I just couldn't believe in Islam. I think it just reached a point for me where it just did not make sense, and that's all there is to it. But for me, I never considered actually leaving, because I didn't know you could actually leave. And I was indoctrinated by my parents and told that no one ever leaves Islam. It's such the fastest growing religion in the world or something like that. So why would you leave? And for me, mainly, I went along with it because I just wanted to please my parents, I think. Now I can look back on my parents and I see a control freak of a father and a doormat for a mother. But when I was younger, obviously, as children do, you just look up to your parents and you want to please them in every single way possible. And I guess that was why I just carried on with Islam and just said to everyone that I was still a Muslim, even though I didn't believe it. Okay. Anyway, for me, I think No. I was thinking how to go on.
I thought you were getting emotional.
No, I wasn't getting emotional. My parents are both university educated, and I think because I couldn't please them in being a Muslim as I wanted to, I think for me university became something almost idolised for me. And it was just, there was never a choice in university. I had to go to university, and that was it. And maybe then my parents would accept me and love me just as much as my other siblings, because I was the second daughter out of three, and the youngest was a son, so I had no chance. Yeah, anyway, and there was also the idea of freedom from Islam. I wouldn't have to be asked, have I prayed, have I learnt this, have I learnt that, or whatever. And there was that as well. But anyway, when I was 16, I went to a sixth form college. And I think it was just a tiny taste of freedom, I think, and it just sent me, not over the edge, I didn't go crazy and start drinking and stuff like that. It was just more, because I had to travel for about 45 minutes just to get to my college, and I think I was never allowed to travel by myself before that. And so it just, I think I got carried away with myself and got a bit overconfident, and I met a guy I liked, and we started dating in December 2012. And unfortunately, my parents found out in February 2013. Didn't go down well. If you've watched the video, you probably know the story of how my mum wrestled my phone away from me.
I think it might be worth going through that.
Oh, really quickly? Okay. Basically my dad had, he wanted my phone to look at the contract on my phone, and I had to give him my password. So I had just stood with him while he was calling and stuff, and he must have looked at my messages just quickly, and whatever he saw, he must have seen something to make him suspicious of whatever it was. And that evening, well, about 4 o'clock in the morning, my mum came into my room, and I woke up when she came in, and she went for my phone, and I lay on my phone just because that was the first thing I thought of doing, and my mum wrestled my phone away from me while I was half asleep. It was like a proper little wrestle. It was quite funny. Anyway, I fell asleep, and then my mum came in and asked me to go into their room. And they basically told me that they knew I had a boyfriend. And they basically said that they were going to pull me out of college, They would marry me off if they had to. And it didn't really matter what I said or did then. I managed to bargain with them, I guess. And I just pleaded for hours. And eventually I said that I would break up with my boyfriend if they would let me stay in college. Yeah. Anyway, they agreed to that, and I broke up with him that day, and I told them that I had, and it was fine. But then the next day, my parents just flipped, and I don't know why. I could not tell you why. I think my dad was trying to scare me. I'm not sure. They may have been serious. I have no idea. But they said that they were going to pull me out of college whether or not I wanted whatever I wanted to do, and that was it. And this time I didn't have anything to bargain with, unfortunately. And then they took my phone away from me. They took any form of contact with the outside world away from me. I lived in a village as well, so it was about a 45-minute walk to the nearest train station. There weren't that many houses around, and none of my friends lived anywhere nearby. Yeah, so it's probably the low point, because I gave up then. I basically decided to commit suicide, quite simply. That was the end of that. And I probably would have. Yeah. I guess it's quite a difficult thing to, first of all, talk about and to get over. Because once you've given up so easily and quickly, it's how do you go on from that, I think. And that's always been quite difficult. Anyway, luckily I didn't, thankfully. It was actually really, because I planned on having an overdose, and I had enough medication to take to commit suicide, and I think I just got scared and desperate, and so I was just searching my room for anything else I could have possibly taken on top of what I already had. And I came across my old phone, and it had about 2% battery. It had about 5 seconds to write down a number, and it had some of my friends from college's number on it. So I wrote that down, and I took my keys, my debit card, and because the way our house was is that I had to go through the kitchen to go out, so I had to walk past my mum, and I just told her I was going to go for a walk in the garden because we had a massive garden, and I literally ran away in the worst shoes I could have possibly. They were basically slippers, I'm not joking. And a lot of people ask me what I was thinking or what I was feeling during that time, and I honestly can't remember. Quite simply, I remember snapshots of what happened, really, and that's it. So I remember at one point there was a crossroads just outside my old secondary school, and my mum was driving along and I was walking like so. And she saw me, obviously, and she drove round and tried to get me into the car, and I had to hide in a takeaway to get away from her, which is quite funny. I just remember thinking at that point, did you know Assassin's Creed the game? I just remember thinking it was like that. It's the most absurd thing to be thinking about, but yeah. Anyway, like I said, I lived in a village, and I wasn't even halfway there to the train station, which was what I was aiming for. And I think after that, when I managed to get away from my mum, obviously, I decided that I just couldn't make it to the train station. So I I knocked on someone's door and asked to use their phone, and it was an elderly couple who I will always be grateful to. I can't even remember their names, unfortunately, which is really sad. But yeah, I know where they live, so. Yeah, anyway, I called my friend who called my boyfriend at the time, and they picked me up from that person's house. And that was actually the first time I met his parents, which was a very interesting first meeting. Anyway, like I said, my dad is a massive control freak. And he started accusing my boyfriend's family of abduction and all sorts, and he accused my boyfriend of raping and abusing me in every single way. He actually went to the police with this, but luckily it was okay and no one was arrested, luckily. Anyway, so my parents calmed down after a couple of days. I stayed at my boyfriend's, and eventually my parents acted normal enough to convince my boyfriend's parents that it was safe for me to go back. I guess I knew better, but I just didn't want to go back because I was just so scared after what happened. Anyway, I was sort of pressured into going back a little bit, but I went back anyway. And then my dad particularly got really, really emotionally abusive and very, very religious, which, like I say, I've not believed since I was 12, and it was difficult. So I'd come home from college and I'd have to sit with him for 3 hours, and he'd talk at me about how awful a daughter I was and how much I'd hurt them and how I needed to be a better Muslim, and then they'd make me, it was hard, it was difficult. And anyway, so it got to a point where this continued for a while, and it just got to a point where I just couldn't do it anymore. And so I had to leave again. And this time I stayed at my boyfriend's family house for 3 weeks, I think, actually. It was, I was still talking to my parents, but I think they felt like they had won in a way, because they sort of had my boyfriend's family sort of wrapped around their finger kind of thing, and they were trying to seem like they were normal, they weren't going to do anything to hurt me, and I felt like no one would believe me or whatever. Anyway, so again it got to a point where there was a little bit of pressure to go back because my parents were fine, and they promised that they would accept me and my relationship and they wouldn't ever criticise me ever again. And so I went back again, and then after about, I basically told them then that I didn't want to be a Muslim anymore, and that was difficult because my mum cried for quite a while, and my dad obviously shouted, and it was, they could have taken it worse, but they took it okay. Anyway, they said that I could stay with them if I promised to pretend to my siblings that I was still a Muslim, and that I don't bring anything non-halal back to the house, which I agreed to, even though I have a sibling that's older than me, so I thought it was a bit weird to keep it from her. So I think that was possibly the best week or two of my life, because I was out to my parents, I was free to do what I wanted, I was happy, and that was great. And then my parents found out that I ate some non-halal chicken at my boyfriend's house. And have no idea why, but they decided that that was it. That was the last straw. Even though I hadn't broken the conditions. But yeah, so they kicked me out then. They basically gave me about 2 minutes to pack. They took away anything I had. And this was 4 weeks before my AS exams. So this was in April 2013. And they just refused to give me my work for a week. And I think they just wanted me to fail everything, because they knew that university was a big thing for me. And even now it's great. But I think they sort of took the idea that if we can't have her, no one can, and we'll just destroy her completely. Which is still how I feel they look today, they see me today. And so I don't have any contact with my family. I have an older sister and a little brother. The last time I saw my older sister, she was chasing me out of the house saying that I should have been aborted. And my little brother just simply won't talk to me, even though I've tried contacting him many times. And that's really it. That's all I can really say. That's my story.